Hello, welcome back to Honor of Kings. I'm Sean Griffin.
And I'm Ken Heidebrecht. Hi, Sean. How are you doing, buddy?
Hello, Ken. Hey, welcome back this week. Man, we've got a fun show this week, don't we?
Yeah, we're going to be getting into some chapters that are controversial. Not like any of the other ones weren't or anything, but this one is one we'll probably end up spending the bulk of the episode kind of expounding upon, where it's mentioned all throughout scriptures, a lot of these contents and the chapters that we're moving forward with. And I think it's going to be a good conversation, Sean, and I think that it's going to edify the body greatly. Yeah, for sure, buddy.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one. This has got some, to me, the content that we're going to discuss in Enoch chapter 21 and 22. For those of you just joining, thank you. If you've never, this is the first time you've seen the show, be sure to click the subscribe button to here at the channel and the bell. That way you're notified when new episodes come out. This is going to be episode 7. We're digging into the book of Enoch. And here at Honor of Kings, our goal is to test the hidden books from the Bible. And that the term apocrypha means hidden, basically meaning removed. So we had a lot of these books in the canon in years past, and they were taken out. And so our goal here on this show is to actually dig into those books. We're going line by line, word by word, and we're actually looking at what it says and try to figure out whether they should have been left in the canon or rightly taken out. And we currently are digging into the book of Enoch. And so far, I mean, we're six episodes in, and it seems like everything we're reading just enhances the American canon of 66 and is venerated by the canon. It matches up theologically, it matches up with continuity of ideas and themes. Personally, I don't think this one should have been taken out. I think that this was a travesty to remove this information from a believer who wants to know more about not just the kingdom to come or the day of the Lord, but who the enemy is and some of the components about the creation itself. Because Ken, as you know, like chapter 1, we get, the day of the Lord. Chapter 2, we got the creation. Chapter 5, you get the first resurrection. Then we go into chapter 7 through 10, and we get the corruption of rebellion of angels, moving into, how it affected mankind, corrupting mankind. All this is going to lead up to the flood of Noah later. And to me, it seems like that it's like if you take this book out, you bring up so many more questions within the American canon of 66, as opposed to editing for clarity. Does that sound right?
Yeah, for sure, man. And Enoch actually makes an interesting assertion in this book. Chapter 19, verse 3 says, "And I, Enoch, I alone saw the likeness of the end of all things, nor did any man see it as I saw it." So, as you just nicely said, Sean, the things that are in this book, even just the first 20 chapters that we've done over 6 episodes, it's just so in your face that you can't interpret it any other way. Now, when you go to the canon, and the scriptures that we have in our 66 book of scriptures that we have, these themes and concepts that you brought up, the day of the Lord, the resurrection, the places of the dead, the heavens, the creation model, all that stuff, angels, who Satan is. We have to really, really dig through a ton of different books in our canon to discern some of these things, which are totally there. But Enoch just flat out gives it to you, and you don't have to dig through tons of books to understand that. You know what I mean? It's just given to you on a silver platter here, is what I'm saying. He made an assertion that's just like, I alone saw all of these things, and no other man has seen what I have seen. And he was showing a lot of stuff in this relatively brief book.
You're exactly right. He touches on things that, you do have to weed through, some of how these topics are just sprinkled in to the books that are still in the American canon of 66, but without any explanation. And therefore you have to glean from context of application a true definition of these things, whereas Enoch simplifies it and just tells you outright, this is what this is where this came from, this is why this happens, this is why we have this word and that word. It's almost like an index within itself, for biblical related concepts and terms. To take this out of the collection of books that we call scripture, to me seems very nefarious. It seems very, very much like a concerted effort to keep people limited and guessing, and therefore strange teachings arise and strange doctrines arise because you don't know what's what, and you're just trying to make the best of it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I agree with that. And I believe that if people had access to Enoch, or at least a belief in it being an authentic and valid resource, early on in their lives, we would see so much like different things in the world today, especially in the community of believers. Lawlessness would be decreased. Understanding certain definitions that are in the scriptures that are in Enoch would be understood better, because they're so blatantly in your face. And I agree, man. It seems like if you're going to remove any books, Enoch would be the first book you want to get rid of out of all the apocryphal, extra biblical books that have been removed and have been in and out of canons throughout the last couple thousand years.
That's right, man. This is a fun book, and even though it's pretty controversial, in fact, that's what we started out talking about here at the show opening. That this particular chapter 21, 22, we're going to go over in this episode is going to continue to be controversial because we're going to deal with the subject of Sheol, and that is, man, we've heard some controversy, haven't we, Ken?
We have, yeah. There has been a lot of differing perspectives regarding Sheol and how it's defined. What it means in the life of a believer and how we're to understand it according to what the scriptures describe it as, right? So I think that by the end of this episode, we'll be pretty confident, and we're hoping that you, the viewers, will have a little more confidence in what Sheol is and what it isn't, and that it is something that is mentioned a lot throughout the scriptures, a lot. All right, without further ado, Sean, I'll just jump into chapter 21 here and get reading. And I proceeded to where things were chaotic, and I saw there something horrible. I saw neither a heaven above nor a firmly founded earth, but a place chaotic and horrible. And there I saw 7 stars of the heaven bound together in it, like great mountains and burning with fire. Then I said, For what sin are they bound, and on what account have they been cast in hither? Then said Uriel, one of the holy angels who was with me, and was chief over them, and said, Enoch, why do you ask, and why are you eager for the truth? These are of the number of the stars of heaven, which have transgressed the commandment of the Lord, and are bound here till 10,000 years. The time entailed by their sins are consummated. And from thence I went to another place, which was still more horrible than the former. And I saw a horrible thing, a great fire there which burnt and blazed, and the place was cleft as far as the abyss, being full of great descending columns of fire. Neither its extent or magnitude could I see, nor could I conjecture. Then I said, How fearful is the place, and how terrible to look upon! Then Uriel answered me, one of the holy angels who was with me, and said unto me, Enoch, why have you such fear and affright? And I answered, Because of this fearful place, and because of the spectacle of the pain. And he said unto me, This place is the prison of the angels, and here they will be imprisoned forever.
The prison of the angels. Is that what Peter was referring to as Tartarus?
Yes, that's exactly what he was referring to as Tartarus, Sean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah. In verse 7, where it starts to talk about him going on to a different place, the first 6 verses are essentially just describing what we had seen in previous chapters about the 7 stars of heaven that were bound in a horrible place and confined there because they transgressed their order from the beginning of creation. And we had discussed in, I think it was the last episode, Sean, where when we look up at the night sky, there's stars missing. There's stars that transgressed their orders and were punished because of it.
And that was in last episode, chapter 18, right?
Yes.
Was that what yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. And that's where, so I know a lot of people put a lot of stock in reading the stars, some even in biblical communities, because there's a book that came out about the gospel being in the stars. And while that very may well be true, apparently there's 7 stars that are missing Out of all the stars in the heavens that we see when we look above, in the firmament above, apparently there's some that are actually missing. Would that change the landscape dramatically? I don't know. I mean, it's only 7 of them, but at the same time, think about how much conjecture is made from 3 stars that make up Orion's belt, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
You ever seen how people do the constellations and they'll just take these stars and draw these elaborate pictures from them?
Yeah.
Like, how'd you get that? Like, that's
it's like connect the dots, right?
Yeah, but that they come up with all kinds of dots that I'm not seeing, and so it's like I don't know how they get those pictures to begin with. To be honest with you, it's not quite my forte of study, so I just kind of take it with a grain of salt. And because I don't really see the scriptures specifically detail in the Mazzaroth, and the idea of the constellations above, that there is a great story to be told. Now I know in Psalm 19, I think it's verse 3 or 4, it talks about the heavens speak, day by day, they shine forth and they speak there continually. But is that specifically meaning that it's the constellations speaking day by day? I don't know. I've heard people use that verse in support of that idea. I just think, me personally, I'm going to be careful, according to Deuteronomy 4:29, not to look to the stars for too much information. The Father may have put them up there, and if clearly to be for signs and seasons, but beyond that, beyond getting like detailed, intricate messages and prophecy out of them, I don't know about that.
Yeah,
so,
I think I am of the opinion of what you're saying, because I'm not sure where that comes from, to be honest with you, man. I know historically you've had people who were able to look to the stars for things, right? Like, I mean, we obviously have the Magi who came to Jerusalem and they followed a star, right? So now if we're taking our heliocentric understanding what stars are, that the star moved across the sky and it rested above the house, that's a little odd, right?
Yeah.
If we take what Enoch says what stars are, and as a luminary entity that has a circuit that it needs to perform in heaven and does so in the run of a day, and they can transgress their orders and move around, and there's an angel that polices them whose name is Raguel, and there's Uriel, an angel who actually leads them in their procession. Stars become different, so it's not very bizarre to see a star moving across the sky for 3 wise men to go and discern and say, oh, look at that thing, and they follow it, and it ends up being over top of the house of where Yeshua was born, right?
That's right. Yeah. And didn't the Magi say they saw the star in the east? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, but they traveled west to go find Yeshua, right? They traveled from the area of Babylon or Syria, Babylon area, over to Jerusalem, which would be west in their travels. So that to me, it's always been a mystery of like, what did they see in the sky? That I don't know.
Yeah, and the same thing with Jasher, the book of Jasher, where it talks about when Abraham was born, and Nimrod had some people in his kingdom that were able to discern apparently the stars and tell of their signs, and they looked up one night, and it just happened to be that Abraham was born, and they were able to see that these stars kind of formed in such a way. I don't know what it means and what they saw, man, and how they were able to discern it. We know that angels taught men how to discern signs of the heavens and whatnot. Maybe that's kind of where it spills away from, is that understanding of.
It's true.
But
we also have Josephus mention that in the Antiquity of the Jews, book 1. He talks about how the descendants of Adam through the line of Seth particularly knew how to read the stars. And so that's seemed to be like a skill or a trait he attributed to that lineage. And that's interesting claim, and I don't know.
The gospel being in the stars, and it's there for us. I don't understand how we could do that today. Seeing that,
I've seen how someone broke it down, and because they're going off the book that was written in accordance with that idea, and I've seen how they broke it down. And like I said, it's plausible, it's possible. It just seemed like some liberties were taken. Let me just put it like that. As far as how they're interpreting this to mean that, and that to mean this. So that's why I just took it with a grain of salt, and I said, oh, that's neat, but I'm going to stick with the words, the printed words that we have in Scripture, because to me it's It's something that we can teach to others without, with understanding and without, hopefully, without a lot of personal interpretation,
Yeah.
right? I say that tongue in cheek since we have 40,000 denominations here in the United States. But the whole goal of hopefully is to find sound doctrine. That's how we study. We go through discipleship, washing our minds with the water of the word, so that we can actually, find sound doctrine and know it. It's not impossible to know sound doctrine. And this to me is one of the great, I don't know, one of the great deceptions of our modern age is for people that come around and think, oh, we can't know it all. Well, no one's saying you're going to know every piece of knowledge in all of existence, but we can know the information that the Father told us for us to know. I
That's
mean, like,
right.
I hate to sound, like I'm trying to make a joke, but like, it's that silly of an argument that we hear where people are like, oh, you can't know everything. And I'm like, wait a minute. We're talking about scripture. We're not talking about everything. And in the book that the Father gave through his prophets for us to know, we can know it. He did not make it impossible for us to know. We just have to believe the words that are put down for us to understand and read and study. It's not impossible. And so
Amen.
I think that, and this is a great example of what we're reading here in this chapter, in chapter 21, where we have stars that have transgressed their commandment and they've been dealt with. I'm guessing Raguel swooped them up or addressed them and dealt with them since they were not following their preordained orders. And then we also have these angels who, combine themselves with women, as we've read in multiple chapters previous, and they're also put to a place of imprisonment for their crimes and to await the day of judgment when they're thrown in the lake of fire. And I think that
That lines up with chapter 10 for our viewers, where Yahweh is basically telling Michael and Gabriel, Uriel, those angels, that this is what I want you to do to these watchers that have laid with women. This is what you're going to do to Azazel at his appointed time. And that's chapter 10, I believe, Sean, right?
You're right. Yeah, chapter 10, that's where we get their punishment, specifically with the angels that lay with women and how they're going to be locked up until, the day of their torment, which in that case, the idea of torment is talking about the day they're brought out of their imprisonment and they're judged before Yeshua and they're put into the lake of fire to be basically extinguished from existence. And so that's what's interesting is we've got Enoch is being shown a couple different places here. And I've already read the entire chapter. I just want to make note of verse 7, where he actually travels from one place to another. And the place he goes to see where the angels who laid with women and where they're imprisoned, he says that place was more horrible than the first place he saw. And so in the first place he saw is, in verse 2, it says there's neither a heaven above nor a firmly founded earth, but a place chaotic and horrible. And Ken, if you bear with me, I may say this almost in every episode just to remind people, when we see the word heaven, that word is defined for us in Genesis 1, verse 6-8, as the word for firmament. A firmament was the structure that was made by the Father, and then he gave that structure a name and called it a heaven, called it the heaven or a heaven. And there's multiple types of heavens, multiple layers of heavens. And so that's why we see in loose translations. And then, like we talked about in the last episode, there's actually the term firmament of the heaven used as well, speaking in a specific context. But many times when we see, like in verse 2, it says, I saw neither a heaven above nor a firmly founded earth, but a place chaotic and horrible. Well, what he's saying there is whatever this place is, it doesn't have the same structure of reality that we have, because we live under a heaven, under a firmament above, and then we live on ground, a firmly founded earth, right? Whose foundations will never be shaken, right? So we live on a still immovable piece of earth with a heaven, a firmament above us. Wherever this place is that Enoch is seeing in the beginning of this chapter, it doesn't have those things.
Yeah.
So
It
that's
almost
why
sounds to me, Sean, like it may be the outer darkness that's referenced elsewhere. What do you think?
it's very possible, man. Because in the last few chapters, it seems like we were above when we're seeing the seas and the waters and the lands and the mountains above the firmament and where the Father exists. But this place, wherever he went to, because verse 1, he says, I proceeded to where things were chaotic. And it's very possible that they're just literally taken out of the entire creation model.
Yeah. Another version says that he was taken to a place where nothing was completed. a completely barren, desolate. There's really nothing there.
That's very
So it
possible.
sounds like if that place were to exist, it would be outside of the created model that Yahweh has made. In my opinion,
And
it might be.
yeah, and in practicality, when we think about stuff like this, because remember, Enoch goes off the biblical creation model. Okay, Enoch is not in a heliocentric model. The whole book, the context of the entire book is set. All the interaction, the characters, the judgments, everything going on is set within the framework of a biblical creation model. So for him to take stars, Ken, that would be sitting in the waters of the firmament above, and then suddenly you can't put them there. Where are you going to put them? They're not created nor intended to exist in where we live underneath the firmament on the ground. They're whatever they are, whatever they're made of, that was not their original place to exist. So is it possible that to be taken to a place chaotic and horrible that's kind of outside of an unfinished place, if as you alluded to, that could possibly be outside the overall big firmament, and just in the waters that are incomplete that we see in Genesis 1:1 or 1:2, before the actual firmament was made, that may be the only place that they can exist for punishment.
Possibly,
Otherwise they have to be just completely eradicated from existence.
And they will be. We're told they will be elsewhere. That on the day of the Lord, when judgment comes, when these angels that are in Tartarus or in this other place that we just talked about in chapter 21, when they get punished on the great day of judgment, so will these stars, right? So they're going to have an ultimate punishment as well.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That is the what's called the Great White Throne Judgment, because it's everything is judged. Everything that had been waiting to be judged that wasn't, because the righteous are judged at the first resurrection, and that's when Revelation chapter 11. That could be for a whole nother episode or video, but and actually break that down on this channel in a different video, like a Morning Cup of Context, where I go over the two different types of judgments that happen at the first and second resurrections. But I think it's a video titled "Who's Judged First," something like that. But the point is, the reason why I mention that, Ken, is because not only are we seeing two categories of things here that are being locked away into a different place to await the Great White Throne Judgment, which is the second judgment. We're also going to read about that in the following chapter, in chapter 22. Isn't that right?
That's right. Yeah. And I said we just get to it, Sean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So in chapter 22, let's look at verse 1. It says, "And then I went to another place, and he showed me in the west another great and high mountain of hard rock. And there was in it 4 hollow places, deep and wide and very smooth. How smooth are the hollow places, and deep and dark to look at. Then Raphael answered, one of the holy angels who was with me, and said unto me, These hollow places have been created for this very purpose, that the spirits of the souls of the dead should assemble therein, yea, that all the souls of the children of men should assemble here. And these places have been made to receive them till the day of their judgment, and till their appointed period, till the great judgment comes upon them. I saw the spirits of the children of men who were dead, and their voice went forth to heaven and made suit. And then I asked Raphael, the angel who was with me, and I said unto him, There's this spirit, who is it whose voice goes forth and maketh suit? And he answered me, saying, This is the spirit which went forth from Abel, whom his brother Cain slew. And he makes his suit against him till his seed is destroyed from the face of the earth, and his seed is annihilated from amongst the seed of men. Then I asked regarding it, and regarding all the hollow places, why is one separated from the other? And he answered me, and he said unto me, These 3 have been made, that the spirits of the dead might be separated. And such a division has been made for the spirits of the righteous, in which there are as the bright spring of water. And such has been made for sinners when they die, and are buried in the earth, and judgment has not been executed on them in their lifetime. Here their spirits shall be set apart in this great pain, till the great day of judgment and punishment and torment of those who curse forever, and retribution for their spirits. There he shall bind them forever. And such a division has been made for the spirits of those who make their suit, who make disclosures concerning their destruction, when they were slain in the days of the sinners. Such has been made for the spirits of men who were not righteous, but sinners, who were complete in transgression. And of the transgressors they shall be companions. but their spirits shall not be slain in the day of judgment, nor shall they be raised from thence. Then I blessed the Lord of glory and said, Blessed be my Lord, the Lord of righteousness, who ruleth forever. Okay, Ken, we got some fun stuff to break down on this one.
We sure do, Sean. And before we pretty much go verse for verse on this and refer to other texts, one little interesting thing that I wanted to point out is that the angel Raphael, who brought Enoch to Sheol here, we're told in chapter 20 that Raphael is one of the holy angels who watches over the spirits of men. And if you pay close attention, when Enoch is shown different compartments and different, places where he ends up going, the angel that shows him is always usually in reference to what they watch over. So Uriel, we are told in the previous chapter that he went to essentially Tartarus, right? And when we go to chapter 20, it says Uriel, one of the holy angels who is over the world and over Tartarus. So he's being shown all these different places according to what angel is watching over. You know what I mean? So Raphael seems to be over the spirits of men according to chapter 20 here. And so he gets the right to take Enoch to that place because he's the one who watches over it and he can answer the questions that Enoch may have, right?
Yeah, it's take Enoch to work day, and we've got Raphael at his job taking Enoch to his job and showing him around, right. And that's just like Uriel took him around different places that he was responsible for. So yeah, I think this is fascinating that, it's just the text, kind of validating itself. The text is just staying consistent within what it's already claimed.
That's right.
So, but verse 1 talks about going to another place. So he's moved from these places in chapter 21 that were chaotic and, horrible. And so he went to another place where there's a great and high mountain of hard rock. And there was in it, inside what seems to be, and Ken, in verse 2, it seems to say that inside the mountain were hollow places, deep, wide, and very smooth.
Yes. 4 of them. Yeah.
4 of them. Yeah. So it's okay. So everything that we're about to read is taking place inside of a mountain.
That's what it seems like, Sean. Yep.
That's pretty wild. It reminds me of Lord of the Rings,
I was just gonna say.
Yeah, man, where Gandalf is falling through, fighting that demon, and he's falling through the mountain and going to Middle Earth or whatever. Yeah.
Was it the Mines of Moria? Is that what it is?
Yeah, he was trying to get out of the Mines of Moria, and Gandalf stays back to fight that demon. And
and he goes deeper, right, to where the demon. Yes.
Yeah, he goes deep down into the mountain itself.
Right.
Well,
interesting.
I've always been, this is kind of maybe a point of not great concern, but the fact that he keeps calling it smooth. It seems to be, I don't know, it's just weird how he says they're smooth, deep, dark, and hollow places. And I don't know if that's has anything to do. I don't know why it would make any difference to where it's smooth, and just maybe he's just saying that just saying that it's smooth means that it's been crafted, if you will, with intention. It's not just jagged mountains that are shooting up, and growing within the mountain, but these are actually been carved out and smoothed out places with intention. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you'd be on to be something there because I know in Jubilees it talks about that on day 1, all the abysses within the earth were created, and so
that's true.
Sheol is also a reference to the pit and the abyss, and so. I believe obviously Yahweh created this place with intention, right? And it looks the way it is, and it's described the way it's described intentionally.
Yeah, so, usually when you dig a pit, it's dug with intention. It's not just a pit that just was from natural formation. But of course, we have the parable of the vineyard owner, and where he planted a garden and dug a pit, right, for the wine press or a vat, I should say, underneath, which is like a small pit, and that was where those in the analogy, when you do a wine press, the vat or the pit will collect the actual grape juice that you would then turn into wine that's been pressed out. But in this case, it's collecting the spirits that have been pressed out of the grapes of our body. And so which to me reminds me of all those allusions to how the blood cries out from the ground, how the earth is defiled with the blood of sinners, that kind of thing, and how it has to be restored and renewed. And that's why eventually Sheol itself is brought before the Father and eradicated, this whole concept that we're about to read about.
Yeah.
So, and
So speaking of parables, Sean, isn't there another parable that might correlate with this entire chapter 22 here that we have in the Gospels?
yeah, it's the famous parable that Jesus talks about in Luke 16, where he talks about the rich man who basically sees and interacts. Well, doesn't interact with, but he sees Lazarus, or a guy named Lazarus. I don't know if it's the same Lazarus that we see in other parts, like in John 11 and other things, that he rose from the dead, but it doesn't really distinguish. But in the parable, there's a rich man who does not have a name, and then we get a poor man who's named Lazarus. And they're
Yeah.
both in a setting that, to me, Ken, the setting that they're put in matches this description of Sheol just about perfectly.
I agree, man. I'm just going to quickly read Luke 16, 19 to 30 real quick there, buddy, just for our audience's sake.
Okay.
So now there was a rich man, and he habitually dressed in purple and fine linen, joyously living in splendor every day. And a poor man named Lazarus was laid at his gate, covered with sores, and longing to be fed with the crumbs which were falling from the rich man's table. Besides, even the dogs were coming and licking his sores. Now the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom, and the rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, or which is the Greek equivalent to the Hebrew Sheol, he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus so that he may dip the tip of his finger in water, which I think we just talked about, a pool of water, didn't we, Sean?
I believe so.
Yeah.
A bright spring, but
Yeah. Dip the tip of his finger in water and cool off my tongue, for I am in agony in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your life you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus bad things, but now he is being comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you there is a great chasm fixed, so that those who wish to come over from here to you will not be able, and that none may cross over from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, that you send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers. And it just goes on, and he says, essentially, if you're not going to believe this, then you have Moses and the prophets. And what I'm getting at here, Sean, this just sounds like what we're reading here in Enoch 22. You have a chasm fixed between the two. You have a pool of water or spring of water of some sort. And just the concept of being split in two, right? You have someone who is righteous, like Lazarus in this parable, and you have someone who is unrighteous, like the rich man.
That's right. And we have in verse 8 of Enoch 22:8 is where it says, Enoch is asking, why is one separated from the other? And verse 9, Raphael answers him, and it says that they've been made that the spirits of the dead might be separated. Such a division has been made for the spirits of the righteous, in which there are as the bright spring of water. So there we get the water mention. Yeah. Okay, as far as that. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think there's also another mention in the Apocalypse of Baruch about something like this too, right?
Yes, I believe there is. Yeah.
Yeah. And the idea of, I just want to make a quick aside for what you just read in Luke 16 and in verse 28 and no, it's in verse 24. And when it talks about how he asks that he may dip his finger in a tip of the water so that he can, he's in agony from this flame, may touch it to his tongue. Now, because this is a parable, and many people think that they just want to brush aside all of this imagery and claim it's just a parable and none of it's real. Yet we're seeing the same type of imagery detailed to us in Enoch 22. But within the setting of this imagery and what we're about to break down in Enoch 22, I just want to go ahead and give a quick preface. There is no burning in flames. Okay. So this idea that we're looking at in Luke 16:24, if you actually break down, if you look at the Greek and what he says in this passage, where he says, I'm in agony, and some translations will say I'm in torment of this flame, or I'm suffering in this fire. And that's just depends on your translation. But if you look, that particular word is odone, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, and pronouncing that in the Greek right, but and the definition does mean torment and pain. But if you look down, and it says it's very painful sorrow, and this is when you break into the further meanings, it means deep personal anguish expressed by great mourning. And so, and it continually refers to sorrow and pain, and that's where we get this idea of agony, like from the NAS exhaustive concordance. It doesn't mention a physical pain, but as much as it does, it says mental, acute, physical, or mental pain. But the further explanation of that word and how it's used in this passage is talking about a deep personal anguish or sorrow. Okay, so the reason I say that is because some people would like to say that, you know, there's that Jesus is expressing a Catholic version of hell, which means a place of literal people are on fire, you know, and that is not what Scripture teaches us at all, and that's not what Enoch is expressing here in chapter 22. So this guy is asking for a drip of the water, and we see what this water is, and that's how Jesus can even mention these things, Ken. So if he's telling a parable to somebody and their audience doesn't have a clue what he's saying, you know, that's why he's expressing them, and he can use all these terms and just keep going without even having to explain himself, because they know, in my opinion, those people back in those days knew Enoch. We see, as we've already talked about in previous episodes, how Jesus quoted from Enoch in multiple places, right? And he's teaching themes that are only found in Enoch, and there's no question or rebuttal to him after he teaches these things,
and
because they know where he's pulling this information.
Yeah, his audience, Sean, that he's speaking to in Luke 16 would be the Pharisees, right? And they believed in the resurrection. So they understood the concept that, you know, there's going to be coming a day where the souls of men will come out of Sheol and take on the resurrection. So this concept isn't completely unknown to them. And, you know, as we're talking about parables, I did a study on all the parables from Matthew to John that Yeshua uses, right? And I made notes about all the parables, and basically it all really boils down to Yeshua's usage of words and concepts are things that are real, right? You have the sower of the seeds, you have leaven hidden in 3 measures, you have hidden treasures, you have kings and householders and laborers and fig trees and 10 virgins and kingdoms and just all these things that we know exist, right? And he used those things that we know exist to make his point, which was the point of a parable, right? So
you're saying that he didn't just pull out of thin air an imaginary place that doesn't exist in order to put these characters in this parable.
That's what I'm trying to imply. Yes. And nor was he using Greek mythology to drive home a truth, a point.
Right. That would be
with our Messiah's character whatsoever.
Yeah, to me, I've heard that complaint as well, that I don't know, that excuse is maybe a better way to put it. The people have tried to say that this idea of Sheol is just Greek mythology and it's not anything in the scriptures. And I laugh because I'm like, then that means that your Messiah, the great teacher, just used a horrible teaching method. And you're claiming he's pulling from pagan sources and as a description for the setting of his parable, but yet you want to say this, the parable setting is not real, but the moral lesson is real. And I'm like, well, why would in the world would the greatest teacher ever, who spoke nothing but truth, give us an untrue setting to a parable in which these things take place? And if you look closely, Ken, in that parable, the interaction within the parable is specific to the setting. So it's not like the setting is inconsequential.
Yeah.
The fact that the rich man couldn't get to Lazarus, and then he conceded that he couldn't get over there, so therefore he just asked for a drop of water, right? Which I think personally, if we're extrapolating meaning from that parable, that he's asking for salvation basically, because that's what the bright springs of water represent, and we get that in other places. But this idea that that's why the righteous are on that side, where it's a pleasant place, and that there is a bright spring of water because it represents the salvation leading up to the resurrection. And that's what this guy who is in emotional, deep anguish and personal torment from the flame, and the flame, Ken, is what I would suggest is going to be the second judgment, the second resurrection judgment, where, you know, all of Sheol is pulled up before before Yeshua. They're judged, they're thrown into the lake of fire. And that's what I think what we get expressed to us in verses 11 through 14.
Yeah, no, totally, man.
In Enoch 22, 11 through 14. So
I want to just jump over real quick, if I can, Sean, to Second Baruch. We mentioned it earlier. There's a couple chapters here that I think will add a little bit to the context surrounding the resurrection and Sheol, and this idea that there's two sides within this compartment, and souls on each side, dependent on how they lived their lives before they died, and what they experienced there, and what they're going to experience on the day of the Lord. I just want to read a couple things if you don't mind. Okay, Sean, so I'm basically just going to read out a Second Baruch here, starting with chapter 49. Just
cool,
pertaining.
Man.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay, so it says, "Nevertheless, I will again ask from you, oh my God, I will ask mercy from him who made all things. In what shape will those live who live in your day? Or how will the splendor of those who are after that time continue? Will they then resume this form of the present and put on these entrembling members which are now involved in evils and in which evils are consummated? Or will you peradventure change these things which have been in the world as also the world?" So basically what Baruch is asking Yahweh here, Sean, is what are we going to look like on your day, the day of the Lord, when we're resurrected? Are we going to have these same bodies? And tell me, essentially, what are we going to look like here? How's it going to work? And Yahweh answers in chapter 50 and says, "And he answered and said unto me, Hear, Baruch, this word, and write in the remembrance of your heart all that you shall learn. For the earth shall then assuredly restore the dead, which it now receives, in order to preserve them. It shall make no change in their form, but as it has received, so shall it restore them. And as I delivered them unto it, so also shall it raise them. For then it shall be necessary to show to the living that the dead have come to life again, and that those who had departed have returned again. And it shall come to pass, when they have severally recognized those whom they now know, then judgment shall grow strong, and those things which before were spoken of shall come." And then in chapter 51, it says, "And it shall come to pass, when that appointed day has gone by, that then shall the aspect of those who are condemned be afterwards changed, and the glory of those who are justified. For the aspect of those who now act wickedly shall become worse than it is, as they shall suffer torment. Also, as for the glory of those who have now been made righteous in my Torah, who have had understanding in their life, and who have planted in their heart the root of wisdom, then their splendor shall be glorified in changes, and the form of their face shall be turned into the light of their beauty, and they may be able to acquire and receive the world which does not die, which is then promised to them." And then it goes on to describe how we're going to look like angels. We're going to be like the stars in heaven and be able to fly around, which is amazing. But I guess what I'm getting at here is, Sean, the souls that are righteous, that are in covenant and obeying Yahweh's instructions, they're going to be given a body that's glorified. They're going to present themselves on the day of the Lord to those who are alive during that time, and those who are alive on the earth are going to see them in their glorified bodies. As well, those who didn't get a glorified body on the day of the Lord, who are on the unpleasant side of Sheol, are going to waste away in torment or anguish even more. So that's fascinating. And my personal...
Yeah, I think what you're doing is drawing a great context to the use of the word torment, like we were just trying to discuss, that it doesn't mean literal torture. I think that's where our modern vernacular kind of interchanges those two ideas, and that's maybe inaccurate to do that. So this idea of torment is talking about personal deep anguish or emotional, being upset emotionally about it, right?
Yeah, they're going to see... They're going to see people resurrect.
That's right.
And they're going to think, oh my gosh, I have to stay here longer and I'm not going to get to resurrect. Like that would,
And that's exactly what we read here in the book of Enoch, chapter 22, where it says, here, let me read in verse 13. "Such has been made for the spirits of men who are not righteous, but sinners, who are complete in transgression, and of the transgressors shall they be companions. But their spirits shall not be slain in the day of judgment, nor shall they be raised from here." And that's what it's talking about, right? So it's talking about on the day of judgment, the righteous are raised, but those who are complete in transgression, the unrighteous, they stay there. And they're waiting what we read in Revelation 20, which is the great white throne judgment, when all the dead is brought before Yeshua and judged and thrown into the lake of fire. So this is, and that's the lake of fire is the torment of the flame, is the emotional anguish of the flame to come, because they know, as you saw there, as you read wonderfully in Baruch, they saw the righteous resurrect and they weren't a part of that group. And so
That's
they
right.
have more deep emotional anguish because they know the only thing left for them is the lake of fire to come. So, yeah, that's, you know, it's a Sheol is being described as a receptacle for the departed spirits, and that's the actual literal definition we see. I'm going to put that up here on the screen as well, just from the the lexicons, the actual concordances. This is a well-established concept amongst people defining words in the Bible. Is that, as you see, it's a departed place for the spirits of the dead, and it's just an abode of the undead, of those. The underworld is what it's generically called, but there's some strange connotation with that. So that's why I just like to use Strong's exhaustive concordance when describing it. That Sheol is called Hades, and we see that in Revelation 20, right? That death and Hades are brought before Yeshua, and he judges them. But it's also called the world of the dead, or a subterranean retreat, including its accessories and inmates. And then we see that there's other, references used for, generically is called hell, it's called the pit, and it's also used for as the grave in many cases. So the idea is that it's a compartment, just like Enoch explains. And without, if you were to read the modern American canon of 66 and you see a word Sheol being used, and you didn't look up the concordance definition of it, or you've never read Enoch, you may think it's just the grave. Is that right, Ken?
That's right. Yeah. And depending on what translation you pull from, I mean, a lot of the ones that I like to use the feminine noun that it is, which is, Sheol, the usage of the actual name of the place instead of one of its aspects, right? One of its characteristics, which is a grave, right? Because you could read, that it's mentioned as a grave for sure, and then you could just glib over that and just assume, well, it must just be referring to like the grave as in like metaphorically or figuratively speaking about the grave that we go into when we die and our corpse is laid into 6 feet under the earth. That's the grave. But that's not at all what's being referred to, and especially Enoch chapter 22 and elsewhere.
Yeah, so just as a quick example, let's look at Genesis 44, when you have Jacob is talking with his sons who had come back from visiting Joseph in Egypt. And Joseph, remember, he's holding Simeon as collateral, and he sends back Judah and his other brothers to Jacob, his father, to try to bring Jacob down to Egypt to see Joseph. And he wants to make this kind of a mischievous surprise. And so, because remember, he's holding Simeon and also Benjamin. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
And so in verse 31, we've got Jacob actually talking about how, if anything happens to Benjamin, he's going to be super sorrowful and he'll go down to Sheol in sorrow. So if you see like verse 29, it says, if you take this one also from me and harm befalls him, you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol in sorrow. So Ken, in that verse right there, it looks like Jacob is just speaking, poetically, is what I've heard people try to say. He's just speaking poetically about going to his grave,
Yeah.
And what I would say is there's a deeper context here throughout all of Scripture, because if you're just going to your grave, yet the concordance definition of Sheol, that's the same word Sheol that we have all over the place in the modern American canon of 66. We then see that referenced in Revelation 20. This is that Sheol, or Hades, right? It's the Greek word for Sheol, is brought before Yeshua. So if it's just dirt in the grave, how's he going to do that? What's the point of bringing dirt before him? If Sheol is just a word for grave, which is a term just for taking a dirt nap, right?
Yeah.
There's no point in bringing the dirt. I mean, that makes no sense, right? So that's why we have a great definition for Sheol as an actual receptacle of the dead. And so I think that's there's a great verse by David. I think it's in Psalm 49, where he talks about his soul is ransomed from Sheol. Do you remember that one? It's Psalm 49:15.
There's so many chapters, man. Psalms is just loaded with David in Sheol.
Yeah, it's in Psalm 49:15. It says, "But God will ransom my soul from the power of Sheol, for he will receive me." And then we see also in Hosea 13:14, it talks about, I will ransom them from the power of Sheol. I shall redeem them from death. And so
Yeah, I mean, it's even in Psalm 18, Sean. If I can just read that really quick, there are
Yeah.
several verses of it. In my opinion, this is from David's perspective of being in Sheol, waiting for the day of the Lord to happen, so that he can be, as you just said, ransomed out of it and resurrected. So, chapter 18, verse 4 says, "The cords of death encompassed me, and the torrents of ungodliness terrified me. The cords of Sheol surrounded me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress, I called upon Yahweh and cried to my God for help, and he heard my voice out of his temple, and my cry for help before him came into his ears." So, before I move on to a couple other verses there, Sean, verses 4 to 6 that I just read there are practically verbatim to what Jonah experiences in the book of Jonah. I don't think many people realize that Jonah died. He
Yeah.
went to Sheol for 3 days, and Yahweh
Yeah. Let's.
miraculously.
You're,
Sorry.
you're right, brother. Let's just go ahead and just push over that one right now, and
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
start that controversy right now. You and I have done a lot of study on Jonah, and we both come to the conclusion that the whale actually swallowed the dead body of Jonah at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, and then spit him back up. And the resurrection, right, is the
That's
interesting part of that story.
yeah, absolutely. I'll just jump over there real quick there, brother.
Okay.
So
Yeah, and this is
Jonah,
something that we find a lot of contention from because people want to. They don't know how they don't because they don't understand Sheol. In my opinion, they don't know what they're reading when they look at the story of Jonah,
yeah,
and therefore they can't make sense of why Yeshua refers to Jonah
yeah,
when he teaches. And so I'll let
his
you go
sign
ahead
of
and
exactly.
yeah, I'm sorry. I'll let you go ahead and read and take it
Yeah,
from there.
sure. Yeah, Jonah is one of my favorite books, man. I mean, it's hard to put a favorite on any of the books. I love all the scriptures, really, but this one is just so short and so in your face, and it's something that has been overlooked for so long, in my opinion. Um, so, with further ado, I'll just read it real quick. So, basically, we have Jonah. He's on the ship. He's fleeing Yahweh, and he was told to go to Nineveh. He's fleeing Yahweh. He's on a ship, and there's a great tempest happening, and the mariners that are on the ship with him are basically asking, what the heck would we have to do to stop this tempest? And Jonah basically describes saying, I'm the one who brought this tempest on us. You got to throw me overboard. They don't want to do it, but reluctantly they end up doing it. They throw him overboard at the end of chapter 1. And the sea stops from its raging. And then it says in verse 17, and Yahweh appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So most people think, oh, there you go. He was alive miraculously just in the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. But when we go
Right.
into chapter 2, we have an interesting revelation here. So it says, then Jonah prayed to Yahweh his God from the belly of the fish, saying, so he's, in my opinion, Sean, and I could be wrong, but I believe that there's 3 days of a gap between verse 17 of chapter 1, when he's in the fish for 3 days, 3 nights, and essentially he's resurrected back into the fish, and he starts this prayer that we get in chapter 2. So if I can read it here, then Jonah prayed to Yahweh his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to Yahweh out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice, for you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from your sight, yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. So he knew that he was going to resurrect. That verse right there is saying, I'm going to be able to look on your holy temple once again.
Yeah.
Verse 5, then the waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped about my head at the roots of the mountains. In my opinion, he's describing his descent down, as you said, into the Mediterranean Sea. He's drowning. And then verse 6, I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Yahweh, my Elohim. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you and to your temple. And then it says, those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope for steadfast love. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you what I have vowed. I will pay. Salvation belongs to Yahweh. So he made, in my opinion, he was in Sheol, and he was supplicating and praying to the Father. And his prayer came before him, just like we know that Abel's
Right.
praying, right?
Yeah.
As Enoch chapter 22 is referring to. Enoch's asking the angel, whose voice is this that I'm hearing?
Right.
This is Abel. This is the first guy who came here, essentially. He's the first one to take residence in this Sheol because his brother had killed him. And he's making supplications before the Father, right?
And I'm not going to interrupt you too long. I don't want to disrupt your momentum. I just want to add real quick that this is not this concept that you're referring to is not out of order. Like we see something else like this already. Verse 6 here in Enoch 22:6, where it talks about this spirit of Abel that's making suit. We see that in Revelation chapter 6, verses 7 through 11, with the souls under the altar. And that, that's talking about the souls that are in Sheol waiting for the resurrection. And they're asking, when are you going to avenge our blood? So this is, this idea of them consciously asking and praying to the Father from Sheol is not a strange concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what the souls that are righteous are able to do. That's what they're doing. They're waiting. They're saying, Father, when are you going to, avenge us? When are you going to give us what you've promised? We want that day to come. And so Jonah took part in that when he went to Sheol. His prayer went before the Father, and he said, I know I'm going to see you again. I know I'm going to resurrect out of here. So he's displaying the fact that he knows the resurrection is going to take place. But Yahweh essentially uses this prophet who was reluctant to go do his duty, to go to Nineveh to preach repentance to them, and says, you're gonna finish what I want you to do. So he resurrects him back into his body, which is not an uncommon thing. Elijah was able to resurrect people. Obviously, Yeshua was able to resurrect people back into their mortal bodies, not their resurrection of mortal bodies, but their flesh and blood bodies. And because he was being preserved in the belly of the great sea creature, he had resurrected back into his body, and the great sea creature spat him back out onto dry land. And so he was able to fulfill his duty that Yahweh wanted him to go do at Nineveh. So I guess what we're saying here, Sean, is often we're taught that Jonah is just in the belly of the whale for 3 days, 3 nights, alive, miraculously, just somehow breathing, not being suffocated or whatever goes on in the belly of a whale. He's able to just live there, which is fine. God does miracles, and that's fine. But
it does miracles, but I don't think that's what that chapter story is saying, because I think that in order for Yeshua's words to be justified, that the only sign the generation of Yeshua would receive was the sign of Jonah. Well, what would be the sign of Jonah, Ken? What is
that Yeshua, as Jonah did, was in the belly of Sheol for 3 days and 3 nights. His soul went to Sheol. His body was in a grave. Right?
Well, is that okay? What I'm trying to say, though,
he resurrected. That's the point, right?
The sign is something people can see, right? They can't see his Sheol, his soul down in Sheol. So I would say that the sign personally would be the resurrection, that they saw that resurrection, just like the people of Jesus's day saw him resurrect. They saw him walking around afterwards. They saw him die. They saw him afterwards alive again and well. And that's where I think that the sign of Jonah is the resurrection. There's no other comparison with Jonah and Yeshua.
Yeah, for sure.
That people can visibly see with their eyes is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
For it to be a sign, for the definition of a sign. And that's where, I agree that he's dead in the belly of the fish for 3 days. He's in Sheol. His prayer is heard to the point where he's resurrected. His time was not finished. And he's spit back out on the beach side, if you will, dry land. And he's resurrected. Someone sees this, and therefore it gives credence to his message to Nineveh, because they take him seriously and they actually repent. Yeah. So to me, this is fascinating, Ken, because how in the world, how are you going to repent? Okay, here's a bigger theological question that we can go into in a different video, but Nineveh was not a part of Israel. So definition of repentance is to stop doing wickedness and do the works of the law and do the righteous acts of God as defined by the Torah. Yeah. So if he's coming to Nineveh to preach repentance and they actually did it, what does that tell us about Nineveh?
Yeah, well, Sean, I don't know if we're going on the same route here, but my understanding based off of the book of Tobit is that there were Israelites in Nineveh because they were there in the Assyrian captivity, right? So
exactly, but it says even the king repented.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing though is an infiltration, because that's between the first and second dispersions. Between the northern kingdom was dispersed by Assyria, then later on Judah was dispersed by Nebuchadnezzar. So within that time period is where we're placing Jonah, basically. And so we have scattered Israelites who are in Assyria, whom would understand the message that he's bringing, but apparently the message gets to the king, right?
That's
And
right.
so we're not assuming that the king of Assyria was Hebrew, are we?
I don't think so. No.
So this is what I'm getting at, is that God's using an amazing moment here to spread his truth and salvation, right? To get people to stop doing wickedness and go to and start doing, and so here we just had the Syrians previously invaded the northern kingdoms and then scatter them and bring them in captivity, some of them back to Assyria, yet they're now being affected by the God of Israel to the point of repentance. And the reason why I'm saying elaborate on this, Ken, is because none of this makes any sense if Sheol's not a real place. So this whole story of Jonah and the power of God bringing righteousness to an Assyrian king, just like we see Daniel affect Nebuchadnezzar later. But the power of Jonah's message and the implications of where he goes and what happens when he goes there with this message only has weight if Sheol's a real place and he can really cry out from there and he can really be resurrected, right? So
Absolutely.
this is why I'm trying to drive this home for folks, because they want to just dismiss this as as metaphor and it doesn't have any meaning. And I'm like, guys, the implications of all this is the Father using the context of Sheol within the story of Jonah so that his message can actually resonate to the point of repentance of a pagan king. Like, that's a big deal. And I just don't, I just never hear people talk about it, and because no one understands Sheol. And I just, I get passionate about it.
I agree, man. And you're right. Like Daniel, when he was under Babylonian authority and Persian authority, both those kings recognized Yahweh's laws were amazing. And they said, this is going to be the edict of our kingdom, right? We're going to walk after this God of the Hebrews and do things this way. So you're right about it being interesting about the king of Nineveh having to repent, right? And he ends up doing that.
Yeah, which is wild, because the definition of repentance means he goes to keeps the laws of God.
Yeah.
So anyway, powerful story to bring validity to the idea that Sheol is an actual place of the receptacle of the departed spirits, and that those departed spirits have some level of consciousness, is the idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
To the point where their little prayers are going forth, right? So they're still talking, and they're still talking to God. And you know what it really reminds me of, though? If I'm going to flip to this verse real quick, Ken, is in Psalm 139. And this is, I think it's verses 7 and 8. And this is, to me, it's just, a lot of people will use the excuse because they either haven't studied Sheol and what Enoch 22 describes, or they try to just claim it's just the grave itself and it's not an actual place. And so they try to explain away and say, well, if you're out of the body, your spirit's already back to God. So how can it be going somewhere else?
Yeah.
Well, let's look at what the psalmist says about that. And he says in verse 7, he says, Psalm 139:7, where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, you are there. So he's basically, people think, well, if you die, you're out of the body, your spirit goes to God. And that's where people think that we go to heaven when we die. Yeah. Or we go up to where the Father's realm is, right? And that's where I would say, no, there's a timing involved. The only time we go up is into the New Jerusalem on the day of the Lord at our resurrection. And even then we come right back down as the city descends. And so this idea of Sheol has always been there as the context of where departed spirits go upon our death. And this idea, even the psalmist here in 139 talks about, he's given the poetic descriptions of extremities. If I go to the heavens, your spirit's there. If I go down to Sheol, your spirit's there. So it's not like we're separated from God, is really the idea I'm trying to express to the viewer, Ken, is that, this isn't some place of torment for the righteous. The only reason that word torment is used, again, is for deep personal anguish. And that's just for the unrighteous who are, they know that their judgment is coming. But for the righteous, it's a pleasant place with apparently a spring of water, and I don't exactly know the rest of the details, but it's not a bad place, and the Spirit of God is there. So, and as far as I can tell, there's angels there. I mean, there's someone's the gatekeeper, someone's hanging out as an overseer. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I don't think it's just a bunch of random departed spirits of men just making their own, Lord of the Flies type island. You know what I'm saying? Like it's,
Yeah.
like there's probably some authority structure there. And just as the angels are commissioned to handle these things, I guarantee you there's angels there that are probably commissioned as the wardens, if you will, of this place.
I think Raphael, personally.
Exactly, right.
He's definitely one of them. And I think he's the angel that reaps. I think he's the one that actually does the reaping. Because, when we think about Yeshua's own resurrection, right? There were angels that came and, if we're to think that Yeshua's body was placed within a stone, right? Within a sepulcher made of stone. What do we hear in Enoch 22? This is a place within a mountain of stone, smooth stone, right? And then you have a rock rolled over it, right? And upon his resurrection, angels came down and moved the stone, right? And they were involved in that part of his resurrection, which I believe angels also will be part of our resurrection as well. They're going to reap us out of Sheol. And I think there's parallels there through even just witnessing, like I said, Yeshua's own resurrection as the first fruits of the resurrection. But just even going with Ecclesiastes 12, where it says that, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. That's also interestingly paralleled in Second Baruch as well. I keep going to this book because I love this book, and we're going to get there, guys. We're going to get to this book and do what we're doing in Enoch with Second Baruch. But it says in the 3rd chapter here, he's saying to Yahweh, essentially, if I have found grace in your sight, first take my spirit, that I may go to my fathers and not behold the destruction of my mother. So he's seeing Jerusalem essentially about to be destroyed. But he's saying, take my spirit, as Ecclesiastes 12 verse 7 tells us happens upon a mortal's death, is that the spirit goes to Yahweh. And then he says, and then Baruch says, that I may go to my fathers, which is another thing, Sean, that we see all throughout the scriptures. Am I correct in saying that it's referred to as, I'm going to go to my fathers, where my fathers are? And we even see this in Luke 16, where Abraham's bosom, right? That's, in my opinion, that's an idiomatic expression for where you gather to your fathers. Now, some people say, well, this can't be literal because Abraham's bosom, what was Abraham's bosom before Abraham existed, right? Like if it's called Abraham's bosom, that doesn't make sense because he wasn't there from the very beginning of creation. And so what are we talking about here? This can't be literal. Well, no. Everyone knew, all the Hebrews knew that they were gathered to their fathers, and the Pharisees
claimed to be of Abraham.
Claimed to be Father Abraham. So that was their head patriarch, right? So for them to say we're of our father Abraham and we'll go to Abraham's bosom upon our death, that's there's nothing wrong with saying that. Yeah, well, it's not a literal term for a place. It's just an idiomatic expression of being gathered to your fathers, and one of those fathers happened to be Abraham's bosom, or Abraham rather.
Yeah, that's right. And what we see that post-flood, we see, all references in the modern canon of 66 referring back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Only into the book of Jubilees do you see them actually, in Abraham's prayer, does he actually reference back Adam, Mahalalel, Noah, Shem, those guys. But it seems to be there's a shift, so and I'm not saying there's a theological shift. It's just in the expression of terms of relating covenant language back to guys who kept the covenant faithfully. And that would be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is why even on Mount Sinai in Deuteronomy, and I think it's chapter 30, verse 20, it talks about, and all this covenant I've given you is the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I want you guys to follow it too, and so that's why those three patriarchs, because they were faithful and righteous, continually are referred back to seemingly, post-Exodus, with all the Hebrews and Israelites further on, up into the days of Yeshua walking around in Judea, battling the bad doctrines of the Pharisees, and they were claiming Abraham as their descendant and their father, and Yeshua tests them on that even at one point. He's like, yeah, if you were children of Abraham, you do his deeds, in
Yeah.
John chapter 8. But he's like, instead, you're doing the deeds of Satan because you're the devil's children. I don't think he's being literal saying the devil had offspring. I just think that he's giving that a comparison of behavior makes you a child of God or a child of the devil, basically. So that's where, we've got all these references always back to those three patriarchs. But when we start to dig in like books of Enoch and the book of Jubilees, you start to see that they did reference other patriarchs.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were so faithful that they seem to be highlighted, they seem to be put on a pedestal in cultural reference from there forward. So, which if we ever have the opportunity to dissect Jasher, and I would love to be able to take Jasher seriously because of all the amazing things it claims about Abraham, and all the stuff he went through and did, and the faith that he showed. And it gives you some understanding if Jasher's story is true. Now, here, I want to actually make a quick comment because, we've mentioned Jasher a couple times in different episodes, and we've always prefaced it with, if Jasher's true, right? There is in the book of Judges, it does reference a book called Jasher. That is the book of the just, the book of the righteous man. And the modern day version of Jasher we have seems to be dated back to a Spanish Hebrew, a Hebrew who lived in Spain during the 1500s. And that's where people claim, well, it's not the same book that's referenced in Judges. I don't know. And there's no way to find out. It seems to be the only copy we have was the one that was written in the 1500s. Is it an exact copy of what the writer of the book of Judges was referring to? Excuse me, I'm saying the wrong book. Joshua chapter 10 refers to the book of Jasher.
Yeah.
So is the current, is in the 1500s when this Hebrew who was living in Spain, when he wrote the book of Jasher, was it him transcribing from an earlier copy that extended all the way back to the book that's being claimed in the book of Joshua chapter 10? I don't really know, Ken, and there's really doesn't seem to be any scholar that's been able to discern one way or another. So that's why we have to take with a grain of salt the book that we do have and try to line up the thematic content within the book of Jasher to see if it matches, just like what we're doing with the book of Enoch, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Even though we have a longer history of the book of Enoch. Right. But as that's still, if Jasher's true, it would give a lot of credence to all the praise we see Hebrews 11 giving Abraham, because we get all those stories fleshed out for us. And we get to see, why he was considered such an amazing man who was called a friend of God. As Jubilees 19 also calls him a friend of God and expresses it was because of his disposition when Sarah died that he had finally passed the 10 tests in his life and he'd proven himself faithful to God. And so it was written on the heavenly tablets that he was a friend of God, according to Jubilees 19. And I think that, I would love to be able to jump into Jasher in the future and take it seriously. So we'll see if we can ever get there.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely, man. So Enoch 22 verse 7, we had already mentioned Abel and his voice speaking out of Sheol there. If we go to Genesis 4:10, it says, he said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." So Sean, my understanding of that is Yahweh is hearing Abel's soul in Sheol crying.
Right. Yeah, that's why I get it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting little, canonical reference to what Enoch was shown in chapter 22 about Abel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry guys, if it sounds like we're belaboring this, this is such an important concept. It really will make sense of so many things. I mean, one of the things that I struggled with growing up was, what I was taught in church was, if you die, where are you going? You going to heaven? You going to hell? That's what we're taught. You either go to heaven or you go to hell upon death. And I struggled with that concept for many reasons, reasons we've already discussed. But when you truly understand the concept of Sheol and the resurrection and what the heavens are and how they're defined in the scriptures, and that there's a place above the firmament of heaven that's coming down to us on our earth that we get to resurrect into, things start to become a lot more interesting. You take on a new joy for the scriptures, and your faith, definitely my faith, has increased since understanding the truth of the word, right?
Right.
The truth sets us free, Sean, right? And if we have half truths, we're only partially free. So I want to be set free, as I'm sure you guys do, and just slough all these incorrect concepts and doctrines that we're taught And Sheol makes total sense when you if you can keep your knee from jerking on this topic, which is, I know, controversial, and it's a hard and emotional topic. Many of us have loved ones who are dead, and we want to believe that they're in heaven and not in hell. So we've addressed that it's neither, right? And they're in a place of
as long as people can remember what we talked about, that this word hell is a loose translation of Sheol, and it's taken on its own definition over time, because the Catholic doctrine has absconded the definition of Sheol and turned it into a fiery torment, and that's all they call it, is hell.
Yeah.
That is not what Scripture describes. What we're reading in Enoch 22 is a place for the righteous and the unrighteous, but for the righteous souls, it's a place where there seems to be, it's not a bad place, right? So it's not a place of torment. It's not a place of fire. There's angels there. The Spirit of God is there. It seems to be a place that's not bad. Quick question, or a quick thing I wanted to bring up, because a lot of folks, they let their personal experiences supersede the words of Scripture. And they'll say, oh, well, I had a near-death experience, and I saw, my loved ones who were already dead, and they were in a really nice place, and there was, river that they were nearby, and it was beautiful, and they were at peace, and they were joyful. And I'm like, yeah, we're reading about a collection of your forefathers in Sheol with a bright spring of water. So there's light, there's brightness, there's water, there's apparently it's within a mountain, so there's land of some sort. So the point is, this is not a place of torment or chaoticness, or this is an organized place for the spirits of the righteous, where you're gathered to your fathers awaiting the resurrection.
Yeah.
So you get people that say, well, I had a vision of heaven. I saw people that died before me, and they were in a wonderful place, and they were happy and joyful. I'm like, yeah, we're not resurrected yet. We're never told we go to heaven. So sounds like Sheol to me. Sounds like the pleasant side of Sheol to me, where you're gathered to your fathers to await the resurrection.
Yeah, and it could be that, or it could simply them having a vision of what's to come at the resurrection within the New Jerusalem, right?
Well, the stories I'm talking about are people that claim near-death experiences, where they say, they were there, it was tangible, real, and and I even have a family member who had one as well, and he said that he saw his mother and his friends that had already passed on, and that it basically, they told him, you're not going to stay because it's not your time. And then 3 days later, he comes out of a coma, and he's back, and he lives another 15, 20 years. So that's where I would say that that they didn't know what they were looking at, but they were looking at the pleasant side of Sheol, where the righteous are assembled.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. I wonder, and I have wondered, with these near-death experiences that we hear about, like, when you die and you go to Sheol, do you know you're going to Sheol? For those who came back, right, in your experience, what you just said, did they know upon the death that they went to Sheol?
No.
So it's weird. It's almost like we're upon the resurrection is when we're made perfect, right? Even in our understanding of everything. Right. So even at death, we're still potentially,
Well, that's why we got in Revelation 6, we got, people crying out, when are you going to avenge us? Because remember, they can't really see what's going on in the land of the living. Yeah. So they don't know, they can't discern the times to be able, and they, may not have, I don't know, this is kind of some conjecture, but they may not have the scroll of Daniel to read, or the scroll of Isaiah or Revelation, right? So they may not be able to use that information like us, right? Like Ecclesiastes 9:10 talks about, in Sheol there's no thought, planning, or wisdom. So there's they're not being able to interact in the world as we are, to see the signs of the consummation of the times drawing near. And therefore they're still kind of wondering, hey, when are you going to avenge our blood?
Yeah.
Which essentially in that moment, they're also given the white robes, which is they're resurrected. And it says, wait just a little longer, because they're about to be resurrected. And that's fascinating to me, because they don't have bodies yet, but they've been given white robes.
Yeah, that is an interesting order of operations taking place there. Yeah.
Right. So I imagine, is it Raphael? He's carrying a bunch of robes with him and passing them out. And, I don't know, I'm being silly, but
a little treat, right? Here you go. Here's your robe. Just wait a little longer.
Yeah. There's so much there, because Yes. I would say that the people do not know that they're going to Sheol. That they don't know. If they died thinking that they're going to go to heaven, they think and they saw a pleasant place. They come back thinking they had a vision of heaven. And that's fine. And it's really fine. It doesn't really, in my opinion, as long as you're not like running around preaching a doctrine that's not in the word anywhere, which says that we go live above the firmament with God, which we don't.
Yeah.
We
and there are books out there that are pushing that type of narrative though, right?
Yeah, but I'm saying is like I've never read one that is an actual pastor that has that kind of experience that then writes a book. There probably is, don't get me wrong. I just haven't read it myself personally or seen it. It's usually just someone that's not a pastor that doesn't study the word. They've had a near-death experience, it changed their life. They thought they went to heaven or they saw visions of angels or something, and then they came back to the land of the living and continue to live after that. So, but yeah, I mean, it can be a really encouraging thing for someone that has that experience till they see their fathers and the friends that have already died or their family or their parents, and then they come back to the land of living because then they know there's more out there. There's something more there. And Enoch tells us what that more is, which is this receptacle called Sheol, and everyone there is waiting their ransom. They're waiting their redemption of their bodies, as Romans chapter 8 talks about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is why it says it's a receptacle of departed spirits.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I feel the need, Sean, to bring up 1 Samuel 28. I know it's another controversial chapter that people go to try to dispel the fact that there are spirits or souls in Sheol alive and existing. Right?
Yeah. So what then did Samuel really rise from Sheol for a moment?
Yeah. And my understanding is that if we take the text literally, and I think we should, because it doesn't indicate anywhere that it isn't Samuel, which some people are promoting out there, that maybe it was a familiar spirit or a deceptive spirit that's imitating Samuel, and we're not to really trust in the fact that Samuel was really in Sheol and he was able to come up and prophesy. Well, no, I don't see that there. I think that's a lot of eisegesis.
That's a lot of I mean, the whole story from start to finish, all the characters involved, none of it, nowhere in the narration from that, the book of 1 Samuel, no one says that it was a deceiving spirit. It says it was a spirit of Samuel, and then it goes on as if that was what it was. It doesn't ever back up and explain to you, oh, by the way, that wasn't really Samuel. That was just the witch tricking Saul. Like, it never says that. It says it was Samuel. Samuel says he was Samuel. The message that he gave came true, which he passes the Deuteronomy 18 test of a prophet. The witch is surprised, and she's mad at Saul for tricking him, right?
Yeah.
You see someone that's considered an Elohim in stature coming up, which means they're a bright spirit, not a dark spirit, right? And then the Saul himself takes the words as the words of Samuel, goes forward. Those words are fulfilled and carried out. Nowhere does it say that was a false message from a deceiving, unfamiliar spirit.
Yeah, exactly, Sean. And I would say that it's even venerated further in the book of Sirach or Ecclesiasticus, where it
yeah, do you have that in front of you?
Yeah, I do. I have it.
You're able to read that?
Yeah. So in chapter 46, starting at 19, it says, "Before the time of his eternal sleep," referring to Samuel, "Samuel called men to witness before the Lord and his anointed. And he said, I have not taken anyone's property, not so much as a pair of shoes. And no man accused him. Even after he had fallen asleep, he prophesied and revealed to the king his death and lifted up his voice out of the earth in prophecy to blot out the wickedness of the people." So to me, right there, Sean, there's another witness, and I know you talk about the canonicity of, the book of Sirach, which is in other, other Bibles out there.
Yeah, it used to be in the KJV. I mean, it was one of the main books. It was just recently removed, actually. So it's also called the Book of Ecclesiasticus.
That's right, yeah. But it debunks. What I'm getting at is that debunks people's conjecture surrounding 1 Samuel 28 and it not being Samuel being in Sheol coming out of
So what we're getting is the context of Sheol from Enoch 22, the application of Sheol from a parable that Jesus uses, and on the day of the great white throne judgment, as it's referred to as Hades in the Greek. And we're getting the application of this context as it's described by both Enoch and Yeshua. We're getting an application of that in 1 Samuel 28 with the departed spirit of Samuel rising for just a moment. Since clearly Revelation 6, Enoch 22, verse 6 and 7 says that these spirits are still able to be talking, right? So there's still some consciousness there to the point of them talking. And I love that when Samuel rises in that chapter, I love it. The first thing he says is, "Who disturbed my sleep?" Yeah. He's like grumpy, he woke up like, "Well, how dare you bring me back to this chaos of this world? I was down there enjoying my rest."
Yeah,
exactly. Because in that word rest itself almost needs to be defined. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that the unrest is attributed in context to the oppression of sinners on the righteous. And the rest is where the righteous can flourish in righteousness and peace. Mm. The peace that comes from the righteousness of God is considered rest. And that's where you don't have rest when you're under, oppression or persecution from the unrighteous, the ungodly. And that is where, we get that further on when it talks about the consummation of the times and how the Messiah returns and he delivers, he takes the godless away so that they can no longer cause oppression to the righteous. I think we're actually going to read about that later in like the 90s of the book of Enoch, chapter like 94, 95 or something. So
so in 2021-ish when we get there.
Right. Yeah. That's right. Because we're running to the end of this episode and we just covered 2 chapters. So
we wanted to do our due diligence on this chapter, Sean, right? For you guys who are wondering, why are you guys this is an important concept, and it's one of those chapters that gets thrown out there by people who do not subscribe to this book whatsoever, and they say this right here, because of this chapter and other chapters, but this chapter solely, we can't trust in what's being taught in this book. But guys, it as Sean and I hopefully were able to do here, we believe that it's all throughout the canonized scriptures. It's a concept that's all through there.
And we didn't even touch on what is it, 1 Peter 3, 19 or 20, where it talks about Jesus went to the place where the spirits before the flood were imprisoned.
Yeah.
And he preached to them. We didn't even touch on that, but that was, back from chapter 21, just simply because we wanted to spend as much time on this place of Sheol, which is where it seems to be the spirits of men are assembled and different places for them. So we've got, a mixture of the rebellious angels had their own place of imprisonment. We've got the spirits of the Nephilim. That's the question we haven't really come across yet, is where are they held? Of course, we haven't really gotten to that part yet in Jubilees, where it talks about 9/10 of them were sent down just to the underworld, and 1/10 of them was left out on the land to torment and oppress and tempt mankind under the rule of Mastema, which is also called Satan in Jubilees chapter 10, verse 12. So, we've got the stars that transgress their ordained commands. There we see where they were imprisoned. We see where the rebellious angels that laid with women, where they were imprisoned. And we also see where the righteous men and the unrighteous men are held after they die, waiting either judgment or the resurrection. And we've got direct references to both of these by the epistle writers, the apostles, and Yeshua himself. And I think that it's strong. And then, of course, the psalmist David talks about Sheol. And, we've got so many mentions here that Hosea, the prophet, talks about it. Now, this was a real concept they all understood and believed. This is not new information. It's not Greek mythology.
Yeah.
This is a reality of the creation model. And that's the part that I hope people can kind of understand. The foundational framework of the creation, one of them was the abyss that was created, the abysses, if you will, like you mentioned in Jubilees chapter 2, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's anything else further on this one, Ken, that you want to go over?
I think we covered quite a bit. As you said, there's so many references in the scriptures. It would take us a very long time to go through them all. We wanted to select a few of them that or highlight a few of them that are prominent ones to use in reference to Enoch 22. But yeah, I agree with you, man, that we need to understand the creation model better, and it is part of the creation model. And the sooner we're able to do that and to give way to Yahweh's word and to understand the place that he created for us, and one of those places is Sheol, the better it is going to be for us and our witness.
Yeah, this topic of Sheol is so important for people to get as a contextual framework to understand all its mentions and applications in Scripture. That's why I made it a branch on my context tree for my channel, because it's one of the major themes to understand throughout Scripture to have clarity, not just on stuff, and it's briefly mentioned, but on the judgments that come and where these people are coming from, what's going on, why there's a first and a second judgment. And so for clarity on these ideas, it's so important that we understand what God has introduced to us as this concept of Sheol through his prophets and through his son as he taught on it. And if you don't understand it, that's why we see so many people grasping at straws in a theological darkness and coming up with wild theories, is because they have yet to understand the reality of Sheol as mentioned all throughout Scripture.
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
Guys, this has been a wonderful episode. This has been episode 7 of Honor of Kings. We're dug into chapter 21, 22 of Enoch. As always, leave your questions and comments down below in the video. Like, share, and subscribe. We really appreciate you for joining us. And any last words, Ken?
Yeah, thank you for joining us, guys. And hopefully you're edified with this discussion that Sean and I were having. And just pray. If you're still skeptical about it and you're unsure, just pray to the Father. He'll give you the answers that you want and that you need, I should say. But yeah, Sean, thanks for the discussion, brother. And we'll see all you guys next week.
Yes, thanks, guys. A lot of people have already asked us about how they can support us and contribute to what we're doing here. So that's in the details below in the video. You can check us out on our Patreon page. So if you consider doing that, we appreciate you and we love you for it. Other than that, join us next week. Enoch 22, guys, we're going to be looking at the tree of life. It's going to be great. Enoch 23, we probably make it through 25 or 26. So we're going to be looking at the tree of life, the throne of Yeshua. It's going to be a fun episode. So I hope you join us next week. Okay. All right. See you later.